All right. Hello, everybody. We have a very special guest on here today, the best-selling author, and of course, you guys probably know him from BookTube, the Disheveled Goblin host himself, Daniel B Greene. Daniel, congratulations, and thank you for coming on and being willing to talk about your book.
Of course. I love coming on smaller channels like these. Not that your channel's small, but you know what I mean. And it feels like less pressure.
I am not offended by the smaller channel label.
Good. Well, it's just less pressure. It's more casual. It's always really fun. And I'm excited to hear what you all have to say and think about my book. The reviews have been so enlightening, and it's great to finally be on the other side of things, to feel what it's to finally feel what it's like to get criticism.
I can't imagine, I guess, but that's got to be a weird transition to have been on one side for so long and now kind of being on the other side. And also, I know you've talked about before wanting authors to interact with reviews more. So you're kind of going into mostly uncharted territories in a lot of ways. So, you know.
It's somewhat for sure. I didn't think it through all the way because I was like, oh, I'll take that mentality into how I handle reviews. I'll make it a dialogue, a discussion. And what I didn't realize is sometimes that scares people. And I don't ever want to come across hostile or anything. I just want to more thoroughly talk through people's thoughts. But I never realized the reason people like Erickson or someone don't respond to someone is you don't want to accidentally like terrify them and be like, oh no, I'm so sorry. So now I've realized it's great to have a dialogue if the person tries to start it. So that's kind of what I've been leaning into, so to speak.
Yeah, and I imagine it's hard to negotiate sort of the power of your platform now, not only as a reviewer, which you've been sort of getting used to, but now it's as a, an author that has had success. We talked about it pregame, you're not counting success before it's out, but I'm sure it's a whole new field.
It extremely so is. And I don't want to ever step on anyone's toes. So I'm always trying to be careful. Especially with, the early reviews, they're so nice, they're so great, and it's coming from other booktubers, which I appreciate, and I respect these people's opinions. But I'm waiting for it to get in the masses' hands before I judge how well I did, because I trust booktubers 100%, but there's this violent mob out there that I've seen tear apart books that I thought were great. So I just want to see what the general response is before I let anything go to my head.
Right, and I know if you're like me at all, like you go to Goodreads or wherever, and you're always reading the 5-star reviews or the 1-star reviews, and I can't imagine being an author of one and getting the highs and lows of that. So
I get the people who have already left 1-star reviews that have never read it. There's no way they'd get it. They just hate me, like whatever. They'll give me 1-star reviews.
It's like the people that downvote before a premiere. It's like, you haven't even heard me yet.
Exactly. There's the people who also just give 5 stars without reading it, and I'm equally confused by them. Like you haven't read it, you don't know. Yep. But there's a couple people who have not read it, but they've left like 3-star reviews, and I'm like, are you edging your bets? Like, what is this? Is this like cautious hate? Like, what's going on here? I don't know.
That is bizarre. So we keep saying it. I don't think I've actually said it. And that is, of course, Breach of Peace, Daniel's new novella, which he has a physical copy of. I don't have mine yet. It is ordered. Comes out March 30th. You can pre-order right now. I'll have the links, all that stuff there. You can also find links on Daniel's page. I mean, you search Breach of Peace. By the way, I thought you would enjoy this. When I looked it up today just to confirm that I had the date right, Amazon, that they always pair, like often bought with, it's all Stephen King books. So really? I know you're a big King fan, so congratulations.
I didn't know that. That's amazing. All right, cool. The only thing I'd seen was on Goodreads. It said readers also read, and it was like a Caterpillar kids book. And I was like, okay, mine starts with child murder, but
that's not a good pairing for a kid before nap time. No, but right now I'm looking at it. Later by Stephen King is what it says, frequently bought together. So
I think that's because I covered Later by Stephen King in a Fantasy News where I also promoted my book. So I think a lot of people went and pre-ordered that at the same time. So I may have rigged the system.
Hey, that's smart. I don't know if you did it on purpose, but
I did not. I blindly stumble forward into things. That's my entire business strategy.
It's working so far. So, I mean, just keep going for it.
People like chaos.
So my first question about the book, to kind of get into the meat of it, is, Brandon Sanderson has talked many times about, he was at a church or a cathedral late at night, and it was foggy, and he was looking through this stained glass window, and that sort of was a seed of an idea for Mistborn. For your book or this novella or the world, depending on how you want to take this, was there like a particular time like that where something kind of triggered your imagination, or was it more a slow progress as you thought about this narrative?
It's a strange 1-2 punch. So the original world I've been sitting in, I've been inspired for, like, I've been sitting in this world I've been building for like 10 years. Like, it's been a long time sitting in my head. And it was originally actually mostly inspired by a mixture of Lord of the Rings and Master and Commander, which is a wonderful sea voyage. That's why the main novel series I'm actually working on after this trilogy takes place almost entirely on ships. So that was kind of the inspiration there, watching Master and Commander and just wondering, like, what if we could put Sauron on a boat? Like, that would be cool. But then Breach of Peace, I recently, about a year and a half ago, really got back into detective stories, which outside of fantasy is something I love, whether it's old pulpy crap or some of the best stuff coming out of Scandinavian thrillers, Sherlock Holmes. And from there, I was like, well, I haven't seen a really amazing, dark, fantasy minimalist mystery story. I'm sure they exist. I just haven't personally read any. And so I decided to start crafting an idea. And I went from there and started just formulating, okay, I've been in this world so long, I know the factions at play. What would be the motivator for some kind of political murder or something like that? And what would be the circumstances around it? And that kind of inspired me to build up a police force that actually weren't in the world before, because I figured it'd be a natural progression for them to actually exist. And so it's kind of just blossomed in this whole mystery that's going to somewhat lead into the events of the actual novel series. So that's going to be you're essentially, the prequel is not going to be required. This prequel trilogy is not required, but you meet a lot of characters, and it does set up quite a few background elements for the main books I'm working on down the road.
Excellent. Yeah. Kind of on that same, because the pairing of Lord of the Rings and Master and Commander, very unique, kind of not really something we've heard a lot. And that's a lot of the reviews I've watched, and I even said this in my review, it's sort of hard to pin down a subgenre. So I'm just going to curiously ask you an open question. Like, do you categorize Breach of Peace in a particular subgenre at all?
I would call it industrial fantasy. I don't think it's quite Flintlock. I've called it that by mistake, but it's very much so in the time of Industrial Revolution, because not through natural scientific progression, but if a god comes down and says, hey, scientists, start doing this, here's the answers, suddenly there's going to be this boom of industry. And one of the big things is, in the real world, there was essentially one of the big sparks for the Industrial Revolution was suddenly steel became a whole lot easier to make because of one simple little change, where instead of making, very minimal for a day, I think they could make like hundreds of times the amount of steel in the same amount of time. And so I just took that and implanted it here. And if you do that, that's going to just light a fire under this empire's ass to suddenly this resources available in so much more. Now you can pave the roads in steel is a line that's in the book at one point. And so I wanted to have a time of turmoil and change like that kind of be the backdrop. And so I really wanted to set in this industrial setting, because the Industrial Revolution is such a time in history that I think a lot of people don't realize is as fascinating as it is. Like, you want to study World War II because it's World War II, but the Industrial Revolution is incredible. The amount of stuff that just changed in the matter. It's the first time in history, in my opinion, where we saw that kind of just exponential change so fast. I mean, we're kind of used to it now because technology, every year we're just minimizing and changing. Like, it's just, people are spoiled. But back then it was the first real, in history terms, overnight change that happened.
Yeah, no, I remember a history professor in my graduate program once said, you have to put yourself in the mindset of someone in England at that time, like their dad and 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 their dad, all the same exact basic way of life with a few changes. And then all of a sudden, in a space of 40 years, all of that stuff is completely outdated. And yeah, you're right. In our modern world, we're used to our whole world being thrown into chaos every 10 years by technology, but like the waves. And it's, I can say as a reader of your book, it's cool because I noticed some of those elements, but I didn't, because it's a shorter book, I haven't yet gotten to see that ramification worldwide. So it's cool to hear you talk about sort of that wider lens when I just have that narrow lens. So that's great.
It's going to, so one of the big things that happened once steel became so much more affordable is that's how steel ships became manageable. Like, you could actually, like, it didn't happen. I'm condensing timelines and changing stuff up because, fantasy. Right. But it's going to lead into steel ships. And if you look into the first steel ships, they just entirely changed warfare because suddenly cannonballs couldn't stop them. Steel ships could just drive into a horde of wooden ships and it wouldn't be an issue. They could just start blowing them to pieces. And there's this really funny story in the Civil War where the first northern steel ship and the first southern steel ship they met and they started shooting at each other and they both just ran out of cannonballs. They just had to sail away like, well, fine then. That was really funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So this on this question of genre as well, there's another side of genre, which is tone. And these two things get overlapped all over the place. And I know as a reviewer, it's sometimes hard to talk because not everyone sort of has the same understanding of those terms. One term that's thrown around quite a lot, and I've been surprised seeing thrown in at your book a couple times in a couple of reviews, is the term grimdark. Before we get to your book, I'm just curious your thoughts about that term. Do you like it? And maybe even before that, like, could you define your understanding of grimdark? 'Cause I think this is such an interesting discussion that the review community has, because I mean, I'll give you, while you're thinking of this, kind of I know Steven Erikson hates that term, especially when applied to his own work. I know Glenn Cook is not a huge fan of that when applied to his work, even though like Black Company and Malazan, I think a lot of people think is kind of grimdarky. And then of course there is Joe Abercrombie, whose Twitter handle I think is like Lord Grimdark, so he seems okay with it. So I'm just curious, like, what would you say grimdark is?
So from a broader perspective, genre is always strange and how it comes to an existence. And then it always kind of molds and shifts around. I mean, I have a whole series of videos about how YA is this constantly changing whatever it needs to be for market, label that's been growing up with its audience. It's no longer young adult. It's like aimed at people in their mid-20s. And so grimdark is still in that phase, in my opinion, where publishers are trying to figure out exactly what to label it. So they often mislabel it. Fans kind of know what it is. It's going to change because people will respond to what the publishers call it as well. But for my personal definition of grimdark, it's very pessimistic, and you don't have many people who are optimistic, who are good at their soul, like who they are as a person, end up coming out on top without at least being corrupted in some sense. Like, those are really fundamentals to grimdark for me. Everyone gets more of just in a moral spectrum. Compromises have to be made, and I think it has a more pessimistic view of people. And then the rest of the genre kind of grows from that philosophy. At least in my experience, there will be a lot of people who disagree with that, and that's fine. My book, I get why people are saying that. I mean, it opens with a child hanging, right? Like, that's not happy. And I think a lot of people, first paragraph right there. And so I think a lot of people see that, and they more affiliate grimdark with anything that's mature fantasy. That's dark in tone fantasy. I don't agree with that for the same reason Erikson doesn't like his stuff categorized that. I think Malazan's actually a very optimistic series in some ways. It's very about like people's perseverance and willingness to survive. So I agree that it's not quite that, but I'm not going to bulk at anyone who calls it that, because, hey, if you want to say, hey, it opens with a child murder, it's grimdark, I'm going to have a hard time pushing against that point. Like, I'm gonna let that go.
Sorry, caught me in a drink there. If someone invites you to a panel, and it's a panel on grimdark fiction as you, Daniel Greene, the author, do you feel comfortable with that? I just find it so fascinating that like this subgenre exists, and it's a lot of books that I like that, as you say, they don't all have that pessimistic feel, but people sometimes just mean, I mean, to be honest, kind of R rating. It's kind of like a colloquial for R rating term. So I'm just curious, like, how comfortable are you with that label as an author?
I think I've read enough of it to be able to speak on any panel and talk about it freely. But if they were saying like, oh, because you've written grimdark, I mean, I think there are sequences in here that I would say fall into that territory because it's only characters who have those kind of philosophies being around each other. But I would respond and say, I don't feel I've written a grimdark book. I'm very knowledgeable on it. I'd be happy to speak on it. But this book, I think people who get through it will see that at its core, it's more than anything, I think Breach of Peace is about the effects of the human mind coming to realize greater truths. And that's what I was focusing on. I wanted to, looking at politics today, the real driving philosophy is, what happens when someone has been fed propaganda for years and years and years and years and years. It's their whole upbringing, and then they start seeing through it. And I ended up having character arcs that I feel like I feel like they're positive. I'm not saying these characters end in a happier spot, but at least in what they're going through, they're actually being pulled out from the dark rather than shoved into it.
Yeah, no, I would, having read that, I think for the most part, I would agree. And that actually is a good transition to my next question about those characters. So there's three main characters. Obviously, other people are happening around that, but that's kind of who you follow in this short novella. I'm curious, and you can say as much or as little as you want about these characters. Did one of them come to you earlier or later? How did they sort of come into being? Because I know writers talk all the time about how characters, you think them up and then all of a sudden they have a mind of their own. So I'm curious, how did they come to your story?
So there's two answers to that. In terms of specifically about this book, Hlid came into existence first. Okay. She was who I kind of, from the beginning, was like, these are the eyes I need to play this story through. I had a very clear image for who she was from the start. But I've wanted to write a character like Chapman since I started reading Sherlock Holmes back when I was a kid. And I just realized it's a great place for him to fit right in. Mm-hmm. So he's my twisted subversion of a Sherlock trope, who's not nearly as smart or, brilliant as a detective. He's just kind of that, I'm really good at my job and I'm an asshole. So he's running off from there. So I really had the most fun writing him. But Hlid is someone who I didn't see a lot of her in media already. I mean, she's a middle-aged woman who's very into physical fitness. Already you have most women in fantasy gone. Because, if a woman's over 30, she's not going to be a protagonist in fantasy typically. And I just thought, there's, some of the most inspirational people I know are women past 30. So I was like, no, let's pull from those and let's create this character. And then, I just kind of wanted to have this stubborn, intelligent, in love person who their number one drive in their life is truth. And up until this point, they feel like they've found the truth and they've been working for it. But as, other things are pulled away, they have to get the bottom of this new mystery because they realize how foundationally shaking it can be to themselves. And then I added Samuel just as I wanted a healthy, normal marriage in my book. That's not a love triangle. There's nothing outside. It's just these people are in love and they have a great marriage and that's that. And because there's not a lot of that either. So I was like, great, let's put a normal, happy, healthy marriage in there. Yeah, no,
I noticed that. And there were times where they actually communicated well and stuff like that, which is oddly rare in books in general, but especially fantasy books.
Yeah, I wanted them to have a couple's dispute that they quickly resolve by clear and concise communication, because I was like, that's not in many books I read. So here's how that should go. And so I just put it in there, and it was refreshing to write and read back, so I kept it.
Yeah, no, I loved it. Like I said, I really noticed it immediately. I was like, oh, that's great. And speaking of reading it, let's talk about the prose. This is your first book, so you're making lots of choices about how you want to tell the tale, not just the tale itself. Did you find that you sort of naturally had a style that you did, or did you work towards a particular feel? I noted in my review, I'll link that below in the description, but I noted that it seemed like you were very focusing on the smoothness of the prose, and it made it very easy to read. But I'm curious to hear what your mindset was going into that side of the writing process.
So prose is tricky. So I found at first I came across extremely bland, and I think overall my prose are basic.
I'm the same way. At least every video, there's one person who says prose is a non-countable verb or noun, and I was like, I know that, but it sounds weird. So I'm on your team on that one.
So weird. Thank you. Yeah. But I first couple rounds through was very bland. And I definitely tried to add some cumin and some cinnamon and all this stuff through revision. But it's the most difficult part of writing to develop, in my opinion, for me at least. A lot of other things came kind of natural. I think because the amount I've read, how to develop a character is something I just kind of have picked up on. A character arc is something you just pick up on. The beats of a story, pacing, those are all things we kind of just inherently know. Like, you can feel when it's bad, you can feel when it's good. You know how to write that.
Yeah.
Your actual technical writing, your style, your flair, no one has ever instructed you on that, typically, your average person. And so there's a lot of just picking up what you like. The biggest draw for me is King. I think King has extreme beauty and simplicity. He got just great blue-collar prose that hit well. He doesn't try to be over-stylized or flary. It just has a way of handling human emotion that's unrivaled. So it's very much so leading into that. More people are surprised that I'm not reading like Sanderson or Jordan. I love those guys, but I'm not super inspired by their writing styles. So it's just kind of, I was leaning into that more than anything else. And I definitely broke out the thesaurus at times. And I feel like some people have had problems with that. That's okay. I like throwing a big word in there every now and then. To me, it adds a little flavor, but If you don't like it, it's fine. I didn't do any. What's the word in Mistborn everyone gives Sanderson crap for?
Burning or something like that.
No, there's a word he threw in there that just feels so out of world, but I forget what it was. But there's nothing that bad. I
always hear people complain about his use of flair so much. That's all he uses, but it's like that's the word for it. Anyway,
I think I overuse the F word. That's the only word that I feel like
really
is in there. There's a lot. I don't know if you let the F. There's a lot of the F word in here.
Yeah, so. You can say fuck on this channel. Don't worry about it.
There's a lot of fuck.
I didn't actually catch that. So maybe it's because I also like fuck. So that could be.
Maybe. I also removed about a third of them. On my last draft through, I removed about a third of the fucks because it was just like, this is too much. It felt a little Abercrombie-esque, and I was like, it's time to pull back.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. But I mean, I guess your characters, like, it felt very, like, honest in their mouths. But that was a weird sentence to say.
No, I also, there's friends in my family that have worked in law enforcement. A very good friend of my brother works in sex crimes. And, believe it or not, those people curse a lot. They swear often. And I find in high tense, high stress situations, I'm bothered by people that don't swear, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like if someone's not cursing when stuff's going on, I'm like, hey, are you an alien? Let's let some words flow here to relieve that tension.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Okay, so I'm going to transition to a little bit more writing process questions, but I'm going to throw in one more encouragement to people out there. Again, you can pre-order Breach of Peace on Amazon. If you don't want to give Amazon money, Barnes & Noble's got it. You can buy it on Kindle. Physical, so many choices. You should check it out. And I just want to say, Daniel, it's really fun. I kind of feel like when you're from a small town and like there's a celebrity that made it from your town and you feel like very close to them. As a member of the BookTube community and seeing you doing really well in those, I kind of feel, that same thing, like, yes, one of us made it. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Well, the nicest thing of all of this is it's hearing people saying like I've inspired them to try and get their stuff published is honestly the most rewarding thing of all. Like if my book flopped but it got someone else to put something out, it's worth it. Everything else is just gravy. So anyone that's why I just put out a video that's about how I went through the publishing and I went through step by step. I didn't speak on the marketing side of it because I have obviously my platform. I don't want to speak on something I'm not having to do. I don't want to lie in that sense. But I wanted to give, if you want a step by step, here's A to Z writing to having pre-orders live. There is that on my channel right now because it's something that I want people to do. Because believe it or not, self-publishing, it's hard, but it's doable.
Well, that's actually one of my questions, so I'll just fast forward to that. You obviously have a platform on YouTube. It's not like the biggest platform on YouTube, obviously, but it's a pretty big one. And I'm sure that you could have swung that with a maybe Tor or Orbit to get a book deal, but you chose to self-publish. I'm curious, what were your motivations for doing that or thought process, if you're comfortable sharing that?
So the first pushback there is I could not easily convince those guys to give me a book deal. People way larger than me on YouTube have tried that and they get told no because they're not guaranteed sales in quite the way that a lot of people think. I've actually sold way more than I thought I would. And just from the numbers I've seen so far, Lindsay Ellis, who I think has 3, 4, 5, 6 times the platform I do, she talks about how it took her years to land a publishing deal. So it's not as easy as just, hey, I have a platform, publish me. And I'm kind of glad of that. I don't want every Jake Paul to be able to turn around and suddenly.
That's a world that we don't want to live in. That's probably good.
Yeah. So, I'm not saying that's Lindsay Ellis. Her book was, I thought, actually pretty worth reading. Yeah. But so also on top of that, if you do land a book deal, you get substantially less of each individual sold. You might get an advance up front, but if you believe, hey, I might sell a few thousand copies or tens of thousands, then it might be worth it to actually get more money down the road as your book naturally sells and you get a much higher cut through self-publishing. Granted, there are still people putting their spoon in your pot. My printer is taking some, every ebook, I don't get 100% of it. So there's pushback there, there's challenges, there's ebb and flow to, how that's going to, you have to basically sit down and do a lot of the math. And from what I saw, it would have taken me a long time to convince someone to publish it. And from there, it would have, I wouldn't be in complete creative control. And I wanted that for my first book. So now I have that. Now for book 2, I'll entertain some offers, maybe, because I think I've proven sales enough, or I've already gotten, I'm not going to say who, but I got emails from people saying like, hey, we might publish you. You want us to publish you? And I'm going to have to look into each one and, weigh what is worth and what's not. But with how easy self-publishing actually turned out to, it's not easy, but with how doable it turned out to be, I could see me putting out all 3 of the novellas just in self-pub. And then once it comes to the full novel, then because the more numbers I rake up on my own, the more I can bring to the table to a publisher and say, I've sold this many copies, let's negotiate. So I'm basically utilizing a privilege I have, honestly, to work out better in the future.
Yeah, no, that's a huge undertaking. So, and like you said on that video, neither of these are easy for sure. But the outcome sure is great this time around.
And I am a complete and utter control freak. So the idea of like someone else doing my cover rather than the artist I hired and giving like exact detailed instructions to freaked me out. It was just an angle where it's like, I'm going to work with this guy and we're going to decide what we want it to look like.
Yep, and it worked. It looks great. I mean, especially like, I don't know, this is a personal opinion, but a lot of books have sort of the minimalist sort of artistic style these days. And I think, I don't know, I just love that work of art a little bit more.
I kind of wanted that at first, and I had like specific things for Felix to do, but then he like sent me back like, here's my ideas. And I was like, those are better than mine. you do what you want to do. Like it was just like, he was so good. I was like, just run with it, man. You're fine.
The beauty of artists, right? That's why you pay them, as you said in your video. So let's talk about the actual writing process stuff. Kind of step back again to when you're sitting down actually at a keyboard. Just some quick questions to get out there. One, do you type on like at a desk, or do you like to kind of move around into like coffee shops and that? Well, when we could go to coffee shops, which do you like more? Sort of secluded, sort of in your house at a desk, or move around various places?
So I get writer's block if I stay in one place too long. I'll start feeling like cooped up. I start feeling trapped. And so I write on an iPad with an attached keyboard, the most clicky keyboard I can get, because I really need like a tactile keyboard to type faster.
That's nice.
And so I 100% need that. And I'm bouncing to common areas in my apartment complex, different rooms in my apartment. I'll go to a park. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to go to a coffee shop because the whole time writing this novella, the world's been closed. But which actually really helped me get the novella done. It's like silver lining for me, I guess. But yeah, I need to be mobile. Standing desk was also tremendously helpful because I can't sit for too long. My back is way too beat.
Yep. Next question. What is your drink of choice? Are you a write drunk, edit sober Hemingway guy? Coffee? What are you doing?
Coffee if it's morning. If it's afternoon, orange juice. Orange juice. I need that like bitter, sweet citrus, or grapefruit juice or lemonade. Anything with citrus in it, I need to write. I think I've gone through a half gallon of grapefruit juice in one sitting while writing.
Lots of bathroom breaks then, maybe.
Yes.
Are you a mood writer where like, okay, you get in a groove and you just go? Or are you like a timed writer? Like, do you like 30 minutes, I got to sit here and I got to work and then I can go do something else?
Very much so mood. And in addition to that, I don't use music. I tried to at first, but recently I've actually just moved into like just melodic noises. So just like rhythmic beats that aren't even necessarily music, just something that has a rhythm to it to help that brain focus. Anything with lyrics is out. Anything with guitar or anything that's like flaring over a more basic beat, I can't do. Now I literally just have like a lo-fi kind of at most something going on in the background.
That was my next question, so I'll skip to the next one. And this is, I think, for you, probably very particular. I have found, I write a little bit as well, that it's sometimes when I'm in a groove, either reading or writing, it's hard to do one without thinking of the other. So I'm, reading, whatever. I'm reading Tad Williams, and then he'll say something cool, and I'll be like, oh, that reminds me of my book. And then I'm thinking about my book while I'm reading this book, and it kind of jumbles together. Did you find that the case? As you're obviously still reading a lot and reviewing a lot. Was it hard to be a writer and a reader at the same time for you at all?
Honestly, not too much. There was definitely like if I was reading something that influenced my writing, but I was very deliberately reading things I wanted to be influencing my writing. I was rereading Sherlock Holmes. I was rereading, certain things that I just wanted to pull from, a lot of Stephen King. And if you look at my channel, it was just reflective of that. So I had the fortune of just being able to decide, I can just read and review things that line up with what I'm wanting to influence me. So yeah, it just worked out. And I don't think the influence was too strong because I'm very good at compartmentalization.
Excellent. All right, this is my last sort of shotgun question. Are you an outliner or are you a discovery writer?
I thought I was more discovery. I'm kind of hybrid, but right now it's definitely, it shifts. I'm outlining a whole lot though, because I find when doing huge series, which I'm trying to lead into, if you don't outline, you're going to lose your mind because you can't keep up track of everything. Tolkien had his notes for a reason. He couldn't. I guarantee you, he does not remember everything about Lord of the Rings. So, like, if you asked him all the dates, he'd be like, "Oh, no."
Yeah.
So it's that's why Campfire has been a godsend, and I use that. I mean, if you're using Campfire, you're kind of admitting to be an outliner, right? Like that's a tool that is meant for that. So I would say I thought I was discovery, and for the novella, I actually was doing discovery a bit, but it's turned into being more of an outliner.
And that's another good transition to this. Going into your second novella, which I know you're writing right now, what are some of the major lessons you learned writing this first book that now are affecting how you're writing this second book?
Do anything possible to get the first draft just done. Just get it done. Because as soon as that's finished, the momentum's there and you're going to roll. It's just getting that first motherfucker done. It's so difficult. It's so hard and you're going to hate it, but it's so crucial. So I think, that's why I think I'm already almost nearly done with the second novella, because I've just been barreling into it. And I'm pretty sure the second draft, I'm going to essentially entirely rewrite it, but it's now given me essentially, because I just barreled through, I'm going to just lift up the skeleton of that and then write through again. And that's kind of my strategy now. And I also, another really good lesson I've learned to counteract writer's block is to, if you're stuck, I often find writer's block is caused by too many ideas. Like you're like, I can go all these ways. Which do I want to go? It's not a lack of them, at least for me. So I'll take the main 5 ideas, or I'm like, I don't know which one of these to do. And I'll write them all down physically. And then every morning I cross out the one that's the least appealing to me that morning. And then by the time I'm down to 2 or 3, it's pretty apparent. Okay, that's the one that every morning I read it and I'm like, I like that one. So that's the way I've basically overcome that hurdle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is just as a fan who's now read your book, and it ends not on a cliffhanger, but you definitely know more is to come. Do you have sort of a date in mind you'd want to get that second one done? Are you trying to get it done by a certain time, or are you just kind of letting it come to you?
I want the second book out before Christmas.
Ooh, all right. That's the first I've heard that. That's very exciting.
Yeah, I want to, and then the third one I'm hoping early the year after that. I'm actually going to try and get the third book done before I get the second one out. So I want to get the second one. I'm going to get both the next 2 written, and then do the second one's publishing, get it out, and then do the third one's publishing, get it out. And so yeah, there will be 2 more novellas done before the next one's out, I think. Don't hold me. No guns to my head.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. But that's super great. I mean, that's Sanderson-esque. That's kind of impressive, Daniel.
Don't ever compare yourself to Sanderson or you will never write. That is something I have learned. I do not do that.
Yeah. Insert your video of him typing on the smartphone.
Yeah, you can't do that. It's very unhealthy to the writing. I had to stop watching his lectures for a bit because he just talks about all this stuff, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. Just close it. All right, let's go write.
Yeah,
because he has his amazing system, but that's a system that he developed over however many years he's been writing,
right.
And you can't, as a writer, just jump into having a system like that. It's just not humanly possible.
Yeah, and I've never heard even the greats like Stephen King, they don't have any sort of, it's like Sanderson's such a odd, unique duck, and that's what makes him who he is.
He's on track to pass King, and King was on performance-enhancing drugs. And I have no idea how Sanderson's about to do that. If you look at their range of output by age, Sanderson's about to just roll past King, which, wow, because King is one of the most prolific authors in history. Granted, Asimov is sitting on a whole other transcended plane where he had I don't know how many hundreds of books did he put out before he died. He was absurd. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how Sanderson does it. It's genuinely scary.
3 books coming. Anyway, we shouldn't get into, again, comparing ourselves there. So writing, there's obviously many different things in this book, Breach of Peace. There's some action scenes. There's some description. As you say, there's some crime scenes. Is there certain scenes or moments that you find yourself enjoying writing more or less? Do you really like the scenes where you can bust out the description? Do you really like the crime stuff? Is it the action stuff? Any of those particularly, or is it all sort of the same for you as you write?
I just answered this question, so I want to give a different answer this time. So I previously said the horror sequence in a cellar was my favorite to write, which it still is. But in terms of something I feel like I learned the most while writing it, I probably learned the most as a writer going through and revising action scenes, because action scenes, when you first write them, you're like, I got this. And then you're like, I can write an action scene. And you go through it, like, great. And then you read it back, or you have someone else read it, and they're like, okay, how the hell did that happen? How did this happen? That makes no sense. They died 2 chapters back. Who's this person? That door was blown to pieces. This was broken. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go through that again.
It was clear in my head. How come you didn't?
Which really gives you a whole level of respect for the people who like actually craft brilliant action scenes, because they're the scenes that have the most going on in a physical sense, which is something that if you don't really put yourself heavily in a scene as a writer, you can miss out on. I think some writers probably have a much easier time writing action scenes because they really immerse themselves in their world when they write. I definitely visualize what's going on, but it's from a more removed than I think other people have. So I really tried to change the way I wrote action scenes. I tried to more envision myself almost as a director, moving actors, and that ended up helping more. And by the end, I think I got it down. There's one scene in a hall where during a fight where there's a door over there and there's a person down there, and they're like, okay, I need to take out that person. And I made a note of like, that door, they need to make sure it's covered. And so they ask someone to cover that door as they go after that person. But in the original accidental messed up version, they asked them to cover that person when they went at that person. So now no one's looking at the door, and there's 2 people looking at this person. And I was like, going back through it, I was like, Michael Kramer and Kay Redding narrated the original version, so I need to ask them to change it. Oops.
Oh no.
There is nothing more pressure filled than realizing a mistake through the narration that's done by Michael Kramer, which happened repeatedly. And I just sent them emails like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I slipped through the edits and I need you to take this. And then always be like, every time this happens, it's totally fine. It happens to everybody. But you still just feel this like, oh God.
Yeah. Especially with such big names. Like I imagine like that'd be super intimidating to me, and imposter syndrome galore, I'm sure.
Oh, since I wrote the first word in this book, just flooded with it. Right now, I do not deserve to be interviewed. I'm just sitting here like, no.
Well, that's it. So if you're comfortable with that, I kind of want to delve into that. Like, how has that been? Because you've mentioned on your channel before, you've kind of struggled with that from a reviewer standpoint. Yeah. Now I imagine that's just much more hardy. Are you willing to say, like, has it been mentally stressful to become a writer more so than a reviewer, or is it sort of some tools you've had from experiencing one and the other?
Yeah, well, I'm a very, very big believer in being completely open about like mental health and mental illness and stuff. I suffer from severe anxiety. And so getting this book out has been probably like the most stressful undertaking of my life. And so there was definitely weeks where I was losing weight, not able to eat, not able to keep my mind together and straight, feeling horrible. But I'm also a workaholic and a stubborn bastard. And so I just kept pushing through. It's not the healthiest thing. I am on Lexapro, things like this to try and mitigate it now because it got bad enough. But now that it's done, I know next time through it won't be nearly as hard on me. Like it'll be much easier because I've done it before. I won't feel as much an imposter. But that stress just comes with my job outside of this as well. Like I get every time I put out a video, I'm thinking, why the hell are people listening to me? Why do people care? And so it's just kind of an innate evolution of that. It just feels like I'm stepping like again into another space of, okay, here's another place I don't feel like I belong, but I know it's my dream to be here. So I'm going to do it. And that's kind of part of YouTube as well. Calling back to YouTube, I mean, when my 100,000 subscriber special, that day I was having an anxiety attack. The reason my dad was there was he was like helping me cope like with the pressure I was feeling at 100K. But I still did a live stream. I pushed through it. I turned off the live stream. I went and vomited. Like that's the vibe. That's the Daniel Greene roller coaster. It's rad. Yeah.
No, I want to thank you so much for being open about that struggle, because too often people in the spotlight are not open about that. And so I think, part of the healing for all of us is like, we're all, whole beings that have complicated parts of us. We all struggle with multiple things. So that's awesome. Thanks for being open about that.
Yeah. And the biggest stressor for me recently is seeing people lie about me. Like, that's the really weird thing. Once you hit a certain level, people will be like, he said this. And I'm like, I definitely did not say that.
Right.
Or people will like cut you out of context and be like, here's something he believed. And I was like, that was sarcasm, but you removed the context. So thanks. There's that kind of issue. And I recently discovered like I'm in GIFs now. Like if you go on Twitter and put in my name, like I come up. I did not know that. And that's really weird. Like just that. My friend just texted me. He's like, why are you on my phone? And he just sent me. And I was like, oh shit, that's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. That's gotta be bizarre beyond measure.
Oh yeah. Yeah, very much so.
So final question. Thank you so much. We've had you for about 40 minutes now. So thank you for taking the time. How has the another side of writing is you're now sort of an advertiser for yourself and your book. Since you've announced it, you obviously have a platform on your channel, but also you're doing things like, sending arcs out to people, talking to me here. I'm sure you've done other interviews. Like, how has that side of things been for you? Do you feel like that's been a little easier because you're used to the YouTube framework or whatever else? I'm curious.
It's easier in the sense that I've been doing sponsors for years now, right? So it just feels like I'm sponsoring myself in a way. I've limited, I don't want to annoy people. So I'm only going to mention like my book in like 3 videos a week. Like I was doing more, but now I've realized like I don't want to be that guy who in every video is like, buy my book. So I'm like, all right, for 3 videos a week, I'll say it. And then I'll leave it out of the other ones. And if I have a sponsor, I won't say it or something like that. But it's, I never, because, a lot of people aren't interested in my book. They're here for other content, mostly fantasy news. A lot of people don't care about me. They just want the news. Like that's all they're there for. So I don't want it to be consuming. And so I've tried to take a balance of if I talk about it, it's less than 30 seconds. And I'm not as bothered if I feel like it's kind of a natural part of the topic. It's just something that, like I can talk about my book here because it fits in, and usually make a joke around it. I think Jarvis he's a YouTuber I respect a lot for how he advertises himself. He always has a joke where he says, always be plugging after he does something that's like advertising. And I'm like, it feels like that. Like I gotta do that in a way. Mm-hmm. But doing interviews, I just like getting to know more booktubers. I've been very isolated as a booktuber for a long time, so it's good to meet you, man.
Yeah.
I've been using it as an excuse for that as well, which has been delightful.
Awesome. Well, I think that'll do it. Best-selling author Daniel Greene. I just love saying that sentence. I think that's very fun to say, and you probably like hearing it
every time.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you so much for coming on again. Breach of Peace. Order it. Links down below. Coming out March 30th. Daniel, again, congratulations and thanks for coming on.
Thank you, and congrats on the recent channel success. It's been really fun to watch you grow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a whole new world. All right, as always, first in, last out, everybody.